From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today from Oklahoma State University, Derrell Peel on the cattle markets. He'll recap the indicators from last Friday's USDA Cattle on Feed report. And Derrell will offer his thoughts on the discussion at that Senate Agriculture Committee hearing last week on the cattle markets and the beef packing sector. Also today, K-State's Walt Fick will go over the herbicide options for treating Sericea Lespedeza in grasslands at this point of the summer. He says there's still a window of time to spray that Sericea. Later, today's Kansas wheat harvest report featuring Extension Agricultural Agents Jenny Carr of Harper County and Marcus Preuninger of Reno County. Plus, Jeff Wickman has this week's 4-H segment. Here on Agriculture Today. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Thanks for tuning in once more. The cattle markets are the first thing we'll take up today, as usual on a Monday, and we've invited back in for remarks Derrell Peel, livestock economist out of Oklahoma State University, and we've a boatload of things to cover here, Derrell, so we'll get right to it. Looking briefly here at last week's fed and feeder cattle trade, though. Pretty limited on the fed side. The feeders, well, some uneven trade there, but some higher bids. How do you read it?
Well, I think there's a couple things. It was kind of thin. I think we're sort of struggling to find direction, but it looks to me like this fed cattle market may be poised finally to kind of turn the corner, if you will. It wasn't really a firmly established trend, but the general notion last week was that prices were finally breaking out of this sort of 118 to 120 range, and the reported prices we did have were around 122 for last week, kind of averaging across all of them. Feeder cattle markets, cash markets are kind of just holding steady with a little bit of up and down volatility. There's been some strength in the futures markets for feeder cattle, largely on the basis of the decreases we've seen in the grain complex and the feed complex. So again, the markets are, in general, just really trying to find some direction here, I think.
And the boxed beef trade last week, did it slip a bit more?
It did slip a bit more. We've come off of those very robust highs that we had 2 or 3 weeks ago. And this, the market's coming back down, I think, to probably a level that would be more in line with maybe what we would have expected. It's still well above the fed cattle market, of course, and we're looking for those two markets to get reconnected as we go forward here. But, we've had very strong demand, not only from the standpoint of food service opening up, restaurants opening up, the grilling season getting started, but I think we've also have had a lot of sort of pipeline rebuilding, inventory rebuilding in the food service sector, and that's probably done now. We've got that in place. So going forward, we've got our buying done for 4th of July. We're probably looking at seeing this market, moderate a little bit. I don't think it's going to drop dramatically, but it's going to moderate a little bit here through kind of the real doldrums of the midsummer level.
Well, then, to that USDA Cattle on Feed report, again released Friday afternoon, if you look at the basic indicators there, they would seem to be friendly to the market, Derrell.
Yeah, for the most part, this report, first of all, was pretty well anticipated. Placements for the month of May came in at 93% of last year. That was a little below the average trade guess, but it was within the range, kind of on the bottom end of the range of guesses for that, but a little bit friendly because it was a little bit lower than expected. Marketings came in right on par with expectations at 123%. Of course, that's comparing to a really unusual number from a year ago. And the on-feed total for June 1 came in at 100.2%, essentially unchanged from a year ago. And that's a case where we're bringing that inventory down. And, moving forward, we're going to be looking towards pulling that number down below last year and the year before's levels.
You say that when we consider these numbers, you would like to also take a look at the longer term when we will see numbers actually draw down even more significantally and maybe turn things a bit for the cattle trade. What are you anticipating there?
Well, we've been watching. If you go back to February, the February on-feed number was the highest level since February of 2006. And so, that reflected the fact that we carried over cattle. We placed cattle in the second half of last year because of the delays in the first half of the year with the pandemic disruptions. And so that's what has created really this bubble of cattle we've been trying to work through here in the first half of the year. From February's high level to the June 1 inventory, cattle on feed inventories have dropped about 3.4%. So we are making progress in getting those numbers down. However, one of the other things that I look at from a longer-term view is to calculate a 12-month moving average of cattle on feed inventory. So it's kind of a picture that you can compare month to month of what's been going on average for the last year. And that number still has not actually turned down. In other words, we've probably got another month or two yet before we see those feedlot inventories fall enough that we begin to pull down that average number. And that will be a sign that we've probably turned the corner on this longer-term pipeline of fed cattle that we've been trying to work through in the feedlots. I think we'll see that happen in the next month or two, and I think the second half of the year will start to show some real progress in that regard.
And at that point then, and then from there forward, that has to be positive for the trade in as far as prices go and general economics, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This fed cattle market has been capped by the fact that we just couldn't process any more cattle. As we get those feedlot inventories down, that cap will no longer be a binding constraint to the industry, if you will. We will see that fed cattle market then be able, again, to sort of reconnect with the box beef market like it should be and will be. And so, we may see some kind of counter-seasonal midsummer strength in this fed cattle market in the next month or two. Typically, we would not look for seasonal or, prices to strengthen through the middle of the summer and into the early fall. But we may see them come up a little bit just really to kind of get in line with where they really need to be, again, once that capacity constraint is no longer binding. So that's what we're looking for in the next couple of months.
Well, that is a suitable segue into what we want to bring up next. The Senate Agriculture Committee held a hearing last week on the cattle markets, on price discovery in the cattle trade, on packer concentration, that whole clump of issues here, if you will. Just your take from the testimony that was given and the exchange that occurred there.
Well, obviously, the cattle industry has been through a lot of turmoil the last really 2 years. All the way back to the packing plant fire in August of 2019, the pandemic, the winter storm in February, the cyber attack. The industry has just faced a long string of these black swan events, if you want to call them that. And that's obviously created a lot of frustration and anger and turmoil in these markets. We've seen things we've not seen before, really, in terms of that whole complex of cattle and beef markets. And I say all that to say that the frustration is very understandable, and it's being revealed in these hearings and so on. I think it's important that we, as an industry and as an ag economist, and based on the research that we have, that we don't jump too dramatically in terms of making long-term changes or policies that maybe don't reflect longer-term conditions as opposed to the short-run sort of turmoil that we've been in for the last couple of years.
As a matter of fact, you were part of a recent summit prior to this hearing of your fellow agricultural economists to discuss the issues at hand, and that was generally the conclusion you came up with, what you just stated?
It was, in general. I mean, again, the ag economists continue to work on these issues. There's been lots of research done over the years. Certainly there are some very legitimate concerns in the industry as we look at markets that have gotten thinner over time. Obviously, the level of concentration among the packing community in particular has been high for a long time. It hasn't really changed a whole lot in the last decade, but it's been high for a long time. And those are things that from a research standpoint, we continue to monitor and look at to see if we have problems. But again, much of the problems that have been identified in the short run recently are really not those longer-term structural concerns that we have. They just really reflect a lot of the turmoil that the industry has been subjected to in the last couple of years.
And tied to this, again, the availability of capacity to process cattle has been a hang-up here in recent months or maybe even beyond that. Packers now doing relatively well, it sounds, in the marketplace. Is there a possibility of packers expanding capacity, and is there an inclination for them to do so?
Well, that's one of the things that's changed that I think contributes to the discussion that we just had about all the turmoil in the industry. One of the things that changed about 2016 was that we sort of flipped in the sense of the balance between capacity in the industry and the supply of cattle in the industry. And so what we had was, for 40 years prior to that, we had excess packing capacity. Packers were always chasing cattle. Their profits are based largely on their ability to get volume. As that capacity slowly declined, and then we combine that with the cyclical expansion in cattle numbers we've had since 2014, we reached a point there where it flipped, and we had essentially a deficit of packing capacity on average. And that sort of caught up with us in the first half of this year. That's what's created all of the market dynamics we've been dealing with in 2021. And so for the first time in about 30 to 40 years, the situation is there where the industry could and should be thinking longer term about the need for additional capacity. So, it's not clear who's going to do that. It's a fairly risky thing right now because the numbers are not, we have a little bit of a deficit of capacity right now, but it's not clear that we have enough deficit on a sustained basis to really warrant a lot of expansion. And so it's kind of a chicken and egg problem here for some period of time. But going forward, if the industry is to grow, and I think it has potential to grow, then that capacity issue becomes a very important one, and the industry will need some additional infrastructure.
Well, your perspectives are always appreciated here, Derrell, and we will talk again in a month or so and see where the cattle markets stand at that time. Thanks to you once again.
You're very welcome.
He's along with us each month to talk cattle market trends. Derrell Peel, livestock economist at Oklahoma State University. And we'll be back on Agriculture Today. We're back now on this Agriculture Today, and to fully bring you up to speed on a noxious weed that has been so troublesome in Kansas grasslands the last couple of decades now, as a matter of fact, if not more. That is Sericea Lespedeza. This point of the summer may well be a good time to get on top of a Sericea infestation, and we'll talk about the options there now with range and pasture management specialist Walt Fick, K-State Research and Extension. But first to the scope of the problem, Walt. This was certainly an issue that arose in the eastern Kansas grasslands, but it's spread much further than that now, hasn't it?
It has. It became actually a statewide noxious weed. I think it was July 1 of 2000. The acreage has gone up and down over the years, but the last survey I saw said it was about 600,000 acres. It spread west, unfortunately, in some of the CRP plantings. But I've, even places like Lincoln County, and they're finding it in pastures now as well. So it has that ability to continue to spread around. It's a perennial, but it's spreading primarily by seed.
And for the uninitiated, what is Sericea Lespedeza, and why is it so problematic?
Well, scientific name is Lespedeza cuneata, but it was introduced a number of years ago. It is a perennial. It's a legume. The reason it's primarily a problem, I think, is because of it has condensed tannin in it, and those condensed tannins tie up protein, making the protein indigestible, at least to cattle. So they don't usually develop much of a taste for it. There's certain times of the year that the tannins kind of fluctuate. It starts off kind of low in the plant, and then as the season goes, the tannin increases. I think they've measured 20-25% tannin, which that's pretty high. And then get later in the season, it starts to decline. And I've seen cattle actually graze it late in the season. The problem with that, of course, then is if the seed is on those plants, those animals may actually be helping spread the seed around, through their digestive tract. So that's the main problem. It's not as palatable, once it gets into native grasslands, for instance, so it doesn't get much grazing pressure, and it tends to increase. And
it's a prolific seed producer and seed banks that stay viable for years, if not decades, right?
That's correct. The seed, I think I've seen estimates, 1,000 to 1,500 seeds on a good-sized plant, so that's quite a bit of seed, particularly when, an area, a square yard, it gets solid stand, you can have more than 200 stems in that area. So that can be a lot of seed. And as you mentioned, the viability stays viable in the soil for a long time. I usually just say decades. Some people, they might toss around 20 years, but I know there's a study being conducted, started now at Wichita State. Some people there are studying it. They're doing some buried seed studies, and over time, they'll take some seed out and see whether it's still viable. So maybe somewhere down the road we might have a better feel for how long, but we know now it's a problem.
Well, here we are in the latter stages of June. Is there still an opportunity, from what we know through research, to bring this weed in check to some degree with a chemical application?
Yes, the month of June in general is a good month to be treating Sericea Lespedeza. It's pretty much in what I would call a vegetative stage. As we get later into July, the plant will start to branch, and it starts getting even a little woodier at that point in time. Usually at that stage, it's a little harder to control than it would be earlier. But yeah, we have some time up. I think even 10th or 15th of July, for instance, you can still get pretty good control. The two herbicides that we typically recommend in this vegetative stage are Remedy Ultra, which triclopyr is the active ingredient, and then the other one is PastureGuard HL. You can use Surmount. It's a restricted use compound because it does contain picloram. It does have the fluroxypyr that I mentioned as well, but that's one that is also effective. I've often recommended it maybe a little earlier when dogwood is still blooming. If you're out treating dogwood and Surmount's one of our better products on that woody plant. Sericea is also susceptible to the Surmount, so you could use that one. And you can continue to use that if you want to now as well, even though it's getting, I think, late in terms of treating dogwood.
In any case, either as a broad treatment or as a spot treatment, any of these options will suffice?
Yes, I think all those options will work quite well. The rates that we recommend on Remedy Ultra is if you're broadcasting, it's 1 to 2 pint per acre. Mm-hmm. I've generally 1 to 1.5 pints is what most people use. The PastureGuard HL, it's 3/4 to 1.5 pints. Probably these higher rates, is maybe as you get a little later in this season, or you get a denser stand, then you might want to use the higher recommended rates. Now, we've had people, aerial spray with those products, and those are the rates you want to use. The key thing, if you're going to aerial spray, though, you want to make sure you're using at least 3 gallons per acre total spray volume. They found out pretty quick, pilots want to use the least volume they can because they can carry a bigger payload, right? But when they do that, if you cut it back to even 2 gallons per acre, your control's just not as good. So we know, using that 3 or even 4 gallons by air is where we want to be. Ground applied, 10 to 20 gallons per acre seems to work quite well. Maybe if you've had it for a while and you've been working on it, you've knocked it back where you don't necessarily need to broadcast with a boom or by air and you want to spot spray, then there's some recommendations there. And, the spot spraying with the Remedy Ultra, I think it's 1% solution. Well, what does that mean? Well, that's like 1.28 fluid ounces in a gallon of water. Mm-hmm. So that's not too much. And, some people you mix it up by the gallon, and one thing I try to remember that 1 ounce is equivalent to 2 tablespoons, so you're working at that level at that point. But again, if it's dry and maybe PastureGuard might be the one of choice right now, then that is at half an ounce per gallon. And actually that would work if I had a 20-gallon tank. I'd want to put in there about 1 1/4 cups of herbicide in that 20 gallons of water. So that's got to figure that out, but that's what it would be.
Concerning any of these choices here, does one need to worry about restrictions on usage of that grazing area post-application for haying or grazing?
There's, no grazing or haying restriction for livestock, including lactating animals when using Remedy Ultra and PastureGuard. However, if the area is going to be hayed, then there are some restrictions, and I believe that's 14 days. You need to wait 14 days after a herbicide application prior to haying. And again, in some cases, if you get surmount, it's got picloram in it, and I know if you have lactating dairy animals, in that case, there's 14-day wait period before grazing with those. But the Remedy and Ultra and Pasture Guard, there's no waiting period for grazing.
Yeah. You've been looking at this Sericea control challenge for a number of years. Does one need to treat every year, or can they get by with occasionally?
Well, I think people have been fighting it for years. I know individuals that they just plan to treat it about every third or fourth year. Mm. You know, if things you got good growing conditions and you put a herbicide out, I've usually gotten better than 90% density reduction when I rate plots a year after treatment. So there's not a lot of plants out there to spray the second year. But the problem is, it's got that seed bank. And some of the crowns, if you dig them up, and you still got pink buds there in these plants that you sprayed. So some of those survive. Plus, we have this seed bank that germinates over time. But so every third year probably what it's going to take if you're going to rely on a herbicide. There are other methods. If you happen to, particularly if you happen to have burned here in this spring, we know that fire stimulates seed germination. So, following that up with a herbicide now would be a good plan, because those seedlings, frankly, are much easier to control than a perennial plant that's been out there for several years, for instance.
Well, again, if you have designs on chemical control of Sericea Lespedeza, yet this early summer, Walt, in closing, producers have just a relatively short time window left to get that done?
Well, I know there's some of the noxious weed departments will spray right on through the summer. But my experience has been, I'd like to have it pretty well done by, let's say, the 10th or 15th of July, and then wait until, later in the summer, come late August and September, this plant is getting closer to bloom stage or something, then that's another period of time that we can spray. Typically, we would change herbicides. We'll use something with metsulfuron in it, like Escort, that time of the year, but that's another window of opportunity. Or, if you didn't get it all sprayed here in June or whatever, you could wait and then treat the rest of the acreage in the fall.
There is, as usual, an article with good information in the Agronomy E-Update newsletter series on early summer control of Sericea Lespedeza, covering the herbicide alternatives that Walt cited today. That is at agronomy.ksu.edu, the edition dated June 10th. Walt, thanks for coming over, as always.
Thank you.
Walt Fick with us, Range and Pasture Management Specialist, K-State Research and Extension. This is Agriculture Today. We're back now on Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and to today's Kansas wheat harvest update for you. Once more, we're featuring input from county and district extension agricultural agents around Kansas, each broadcast right here. And we're told that cutting is quickly nearing an end in Harper County, far south central Kansas. We'll find out more from extension agricultural agent Jenny Carr. And Jenny, open weather has allowed your producers to push right along. As you look at the results so far, have they been reasonably good in that area?
They have been, Eric. I've had reports from producers of anywhere from the 30 to the 70 bushel range, which is very good for Harper County wheat production.
Again, that's a pretty good range. What's the difference maker there, do you think, or can that be pinned down?
I don't think we can pin that down. We had a late freeze, but there was not widespread freeze damage in Harper County. Our test weights are holding good at 60 plus, and I would think more than likely it was a dry spell we had in April.
It's interesting, other counties in the south central region as well have reported that the test weights have been good to very good. That heat of several days back apparently did not deter the ripening of those kernels.
It did not. We stayed cool and moist for so long until just right before harvest started, and then our temperature went up, and so we didn't have what I call the really brutal dry down of the wheat crop like we've had sometimes in the past.
So test weight's good, yields quite good in a number of locales. You do have some numbers, at least an idea of the protein content trend down there, you say?
We do. Our protein has not been high. It's been in the 10.5 range on a lot of fields, but there have been a few that have reported 12.5% protein. And I was asking producers about, if it was a specific variety, and the information I got, it was a blend of some public varieties that they had put together. And it was obviously a varietal difference because when the production practices were the same across the operation, one field was lower, but this blend was higher. So they were pretty excited about that.
And as far as overall varietal performance, without necessarily naming names, are you seeing wide differences from variety to variety, or is there a consistency there?
There is a consistency on some of the varieties that have done really well. And yield aside, I think one thing that's been very good for our producers is there's some technologies that have come out in the last 2 years that they've been able to use to clean up some fields, which is going to help them in the long run in their dockage for foreign matter and stuff like that. So they've used those technologies this year and seen a great benefit, and the yields have maintained themselves with those technologies.
Always need to ask about the disease battles that your wheat growers might have fought this growing season. Was that a major consequence at all?
Yes, I think it was. In a lot of producers, putting on a fungicide is just as common as putting on fertilizer. And when we were so dry in April, we had producers that were like, it's not looking good because we are so dry, and they opted not to put on fungicide. And we've seen some possible barley yellow dwarf virus effects on some fields and just some yield differences, 15 bushel yield differences in fields that had fungicide applied versus not. So it was a marked difference. It paid this year to put on fungicide.
And that is the other side of it. The market prices that allow a producer to maybe relax a little more as they invest in that fungicide.
Yes.
So they're wrapping up, and really to that, the profitability is definitely there in wheat this year, it would seem. So your growers in Harper County ought to be fairly content.
They should be content, and I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see some double crop beans and possibly some milo go in for some added value to those acres.
Jenny, thank you. Appreciate it very much. We'll talk again.
You're welcome.
Jenny Carr with us. Jenny is the Extension Agricultural Agent in Harper County along the Kansas-Oklahoma border in south central Kansas. And next up, we'll move a couple of counties to the north and find out how wheat harvest has progressed in Reno County. The Extension Agricultural Agent there is Marcus Preuninger. Marcus, how far along are your producers? They really got out of the gate pretty fast with harvest a couple of weeks back, didn't they?
Yes, sir, especially, I guess, last week when I was at camp, but down around Purdy Prairie, they're pretty much complete down on the south side and a little over 50% up on the north side in Nickerson. So, being the third largest landmass county in Kansas, I got quite a bit of variation.
Generally, has cutting gone smoothly? Have there been any challenges or hang-ups?
From what I've heard, there hasn't been, and what I've seen, there hasn't been. It seems to be going pretty smoothly.
Of those areas that have been cut then, what sorts of results are you seeing and are your producers seeing out of their fields?
Right there around Purdy Prairie, they're seeing about 60 pounds or better and with a yield of 55 bushels an acre. Moisture levels is around 10%, and it gets a little better around Nickerson, but still with that same 10% moisture is what the tests have been showing.
But around 50 bushels per acre, that's a reasonably good output. Was that about where they expected yields would be?
I would think so, especially with all the heartaches we've had over the winter with that late freeze that we had from, Kansas down to Texas.
Have you seen, as you visited with various producers, Marcus, any differences in management that actually resulted in differences in their eventual yields?
Yes and no, but especially with those guys spraying fungicide for the leaf rust and stem rust, and that seems to be better. And then, of course, if you have that green bridge with wheat streak mosaic, that's going to hurt you too.
Are any of your producers giving thought to double cropping after the harvest with a row crop?
Yes, actually maybe putting in a soybean double crop trial in this year.
All in all, are they chalking it up as a successful year, do you think, though, with their wheat, given what it was like going into the harvest?
Yes, sir. I think most of them would consider it was a successful year.
Well, very well. We appreciate you rounding up a few thoughts from your growers on how their wheat harvest has gone so far. Marcus, thank you, and we will talk again soon.
Yes, sir.
Marcus Preuninger is the Extension Agricultural Agent in Reno County, south central Kansas, where they are pushing right along with their harvest in that area. That is today's Wheat Harvest Update. We'll have another installment for you this time tomorrow, right here. Next up for you on Agriculture Today, a look at changes forthcoming in the activities available for 4-H'ers at Rock Springs 4-H Center. Jeff Wickman awaits with his guests for this week's 4-H segment. Next on the K-State Radio Network.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Beginning next year, youth attending camp at Rock Springs Ranch will have more options. Kansas 4-H program leader Wade Weber, Kansas 4-H Foundation President Jake Worcester, and Southwest Area Kansas 4-H Youth Development Specialist Amy Sollock are here to discuss the operational changes and expanded opportunities that will be available. Amy, there's a lot going on at 4-H Center right now at Rock Springs, but there is going to be even more going on in 2022, and you're making some changes.
Yeah, camp is in full swing right now, but we're already looking ahead to what camp will look like in year 2022 and beyond. We're really excited about what's in store. But as you know, the 4-H experience is delivered in a variety of ways. People are probably most familiar with our community club program, but we also reach a lot of young people through school enrichment or after-school programs, but of course, camping. And in recent years, we've kind of doubled down on our commitment to 4-H camping as a delivery mode, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that it's the highest quality experience as possible. This morning, I've invited Wade Weber, our Kansas 4-H program leader, and Jake Worcester, the president of the Kansas 4-H Foundation, to share a little bit about our efforts and what's in store for Kansas 4-H camp.
Wade, first off, maybe just some background in terms of the operational changes that you decided to make.
In particular, the changing landscape of youth development, one of our responsibilities as youth development professionals and extension professionals is to continue to monitor the landscape, the professional fidelity around our programming. In other words, what's our peers in the camping industry? How do they continue to learn? And so in the same respect as things have changed, we've all had a lot of changes this last year because of the COVID experience. But at the same token, there's been changes when it comes to youth development, when it comes to creating a safe and supportive learning environment for young people. And so the university, as well as the Kansas 4-H Foundation and their affiliated peers in the American Camping Association, continue to uphold that highest level of standard when it comes to camper care and safety, to continue to make sure that young people, anybody who wants to have a 4-H experience can have a 4-H experience. We want them to have a 4-H camp experience. And so it's in light of that context that systemic changes were needed to ensure the highest quality care and the highest quality opportunity for young people to have a great immersive experience at Rock Springs Ranch. And so it's been a delight to work with the task force and to move forward with some of the conversations about what those standards need to be and to ensure that highest degree of care and to ensure the greatest experience for young people while they're at camp. It's a partnership between Kansas State University, the Kansas 4-H Foundation, Rock Springs Ranch, and the Kansas 4-H program to ensure that any young person who's a part of 4-H programming, and no matter what delivery mode, as Amy was talking about, has the highest degree of engagement and highest degree of quality experience for them as a camper and as a participant in Kansas 4-H.
Jake, go ahead and jump in and give us some of those specifics.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. And at the Kansas 4-H Foundation, we're excited to be partners in this. We've owned and operated Rock Springs Ranch for what is now 75 years of Kansas 4-H camp. And we're looking forward to the next 75 years. And this partnership and the power of philanthropy is giving us an opportunity starting in 2022 to expand 4-H camp and have more weeks of 4-H camp than we have had in a long, long time. And we're thrilled about that. one of the big changes that parents may see as they enter the camp experience is more choice and more opportunity, and the option that they have to select the best dates for their youth and for their youth to select the kind of experience that they want. There will be what feels very close to the traditional 4-H county camp experience that we've had for 75 years in terms of 3-night, 4-day experiences. We'll have longer experiences for youth who want to come for a full week. We have leadership development experiences for our traditional counselor age youth, where they'll get to have age-appropriate leadership development opportunities building on that tradition of youth as leaders in 4-H. And really, we're excited for 4-H aged youth of any age, from our earliest members at 7 years old all the way up to those who are at the end of their 4-H experience, to have a camp experience at Rock Springs Ranch. And then we hope that a few of those love it so much that they want to keep coming back in the summers after that during their college years and beyond, and be professional camp staff that provide the counselor experience. We want that to be a 4-H experience through and through, and we're excited about what this partnership and what the generous donors who help make it possible are going to do for us in the future. We're looking forward to thousands more youth coming through Rock Springs in the next 75 years that make Kansas a better place to live, work, and play.
Was that one of the things that parents and youth both wanted, was a little bit more flexibility in when they could attend camps?
Yeah, that's one of the pieces of feedback we've received, but really as we examined starting a couple of years ago what we did well and where we had room for improvement, one of the challenges of the current model is it's a pretty tight time frame, and most youth are given, based on their geographic location, one set of dates, one 4-day window in which 4-H camp happens. Just in the last week, I've had 3 different 4-H moms come to me and say they are so excited about next year because this year one of their youth was unable to come to camp because of a softball tournament or a family vacation or a science camp that they had already signed up for. Starting next year, they'll have the option of 7 to 8 weeks of camp that they can choose from, and they can find the dates that work best for them and make their summer complete.
So you're already starting to get the word out and you're getting good feedback already.
Yeah. We really will launch our marketing efforts around the new camp model after we complete 4-H camp this summer. We wanted to make sure that 2021 was a year of celebrating 75 years in addition to relaunching camp after a year of being closed due to the pandemic. And so we've had a great time. We're about a week away from 4-H camp kind of officially coming to a close for the summer. And at Rock Springs, we'll move to serving some of our other youth and adult groups that come. But at that point, we'll really go full force into our marketing effort. We'll have opportunities for parents to register much earlier than they have in the past so that they can begin planning. We know that's another piece of feedback we got is parents these days start planning summer at the end of summer this year. They start planning next summer. And so we want to make sure they know what the schedule looks like, that they can begin working that into other dates as they think about other youth opportunities, everything from sports to other camps to family commitments and all those pieces. We want to be at the forefront. And we'll make that available to 4-H youth starting September 1st, the ability to go ahead and register for the dates that they want. We'll work in partnership with local 4-H programs. They may target specific dates and say, here in Finney County, we want to try to go June 8th to 12th. And that's great. And if that works, wonderful. But if it doesn't work in the schedule for a young person, they can select from another date or another experience that works better for them.
And all this information will be online, I assume.
It will be. We encourage folks to visit rockspringsranch.org or our Kansas 4-H site. There will be camp information on local program websites as well. But rockspringsranch.org will have the full-fledged camp experience, and that'll be where parents can register their youth starting in September to get that camp experience.
That's Kansas 4-H Foundation President Jake Worcester, along with Kansas 4-H Program Leader Wade Weber, and Southwest Area Kansas 4-H Youth Development Specialist Amy Sollock, with an update on expanded opportunities planned for youth at Rock Springs Ranch. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.